Hi everyone, I'm Francesco Pasetti. I'm research fellow at the CEDAW migration area and adjunct professor at IBEI. And I'm very happy and pleased to introduce today's speaker, Juan Carlos Triviño Salazar, who is research fellow at the Institute of Barcelona International Study, IBEI. He holds a PhD in political and social science from the Pompeu Fabra University, which I had the pleasure to follow as a PhD candidate, his thesis defend. He's an expert in the field of multi-level governance of immigration, with a special focus on urban question and regulatory governance. And Juan Carlos has several relevant publications on the matter, some of which are in top journals of the field, like the Ethnic and Racial Studies and the Journal of Ethnic and Racial Studies. And following the 2015 refugee crisis, the so-called and badly called refugees crisis, he has centered his attention to the issue of asylum seeker and refugee integration, paying special attention to the role of local actors. And at the moment, he's the principal investigator of the Catalan government-funded project Local Ref, Refugee Welcome, which analyzes the local integration of refugees seen through multi-level lenses. And today he presents us one of the outputs of such project. And after the presentation, which hopefully will last about 30 and 40 minutes, I will give some comments to Juan Carlos' paper and then give the floor to comments and questions coming from the public, which will last till the end of the session, foreseen about 2:45. And so, welcome, Juan Carlos. Thanks for giving me this opportunity to be your discussant, and the floor is yours.
So, hello everyone, and Francesco, thank you so much for the warm introduction to today's discussion. Also, I would like to thank Martijn for arranging this session for today. I'm really excited to share with all of you, these preliminary findings from the project that I'm currently leading, which is the project Local Ref, as Francesco correctly indicated. This project is funded by the Institute of Self-Governing Studies, and actually this project deals with all these questions related to the role of cities in the multi-level governance of refugee reception. So for today, I would like to present this paper, which is an outcome of this project. I see that there is also Jordi, who is also a research assistant of the project, who has also helped me with the data collection for this particular paper. So the paper is titled Leaders of Laggards, Barcelona, Madrid, and the Reception of Refugees Through Multi-Level Lenses. And I would like to start with, these two pictures that pretty much illustrate the topic that I will be discussing today with all of you. These two pictures were taken in 2015. Those of you who were here in Barcelona, you probably are familiar with this picture that shows the City Hall of Barcelona and the City Hall of Madrid in September 2015, when both municipalities decided to put these banners on their facades. And these banners simply represented the position of both cities in asking the European Union, asking the Spanish government to have a greater role in refugee reception. Actually, Barcelona was quite eloquent in European and international forums, asking for a greater position of cities in this regard. Madrid joined this claim by Barcelona by supporting it and also joining an informal network of cities of refuge that precisely try to advocate for this greater role. I mean, receiving greater competences, receiving more resources. So in this context, a question that emerged is the question of leadership, because as we have seen in the discourse around this issue, and the discourse that precisely refers to these cities, is that these cities has led actions in the field of refugee receptions. These cities has led international forums where other mayors have got together precisely to discuss about these issues. So I wanted to go beyond this discursive idea of what is leading, and I wanted to ask the question, when does a city exert leadership in the governance of asylum seeker and refugee reception? And not only that, I wanted to learn, after defining what city leadership is in this field, what are the implications of such leadership for local actors. So throughout my paper, I argue that city leadership in the field of asylum seeker and refugee reception is a process based on occupying political and policy spaces in multi-level governance arrangements. And when I speak about occupying, I'm referring to not a peaceful occupation of these spaces. I mean, this occupation occurs in conflict with other administrative levels, in conflict with other actors, in conflict with other arenas that may not see cities as a relevant actor in the process. And the second part of my argument in this paper is that the political capacity to make different interests converge towards a transformative direction, what I call a city vision at the local level, needs of the implementation of actions and actors that help realizing such vision. So my second argument is very much related to this whole idea of city leadership. I mean, in order for this city leadership to emerge in this field, we need cities to converge, to have a consensus of what is the direction that they want to take in this field. And this consensus should lead to the implementation of different actions. So moving forward with my paper or my presentation, I would like to tell you a little bit of the literature that I wanted to include in putting forward my question, and specifically I refer to the literature on multi-level governance on immigrant integration. As you know, multi-level governance processes refer to these vertical and horizontal relationships that may emerge among different actors on different policy fields. I mean, the vertical dimension refers to the relationship with other administrative levels, the local, national levels, and the horizontal dimension refers to the state, non-state actors relationship. So from these arrangements, we can have this concept of multi-level governance. Of course, this concept has been widely discussed in the literature on immigrant integration, and more specifically on the literature that discusses the local turn on migration studies. And this local turn migration studies precisely says that cities in the last decades have occupied a protagonist role in the policy making of immigrant integration. So from this perspective of multi-level governance and the relationship with cities in the field of immigrant integration, we see a seminal study by Peter Scholten from 2013, where he classifies the position that cities occupy in these arrangements in four possibilities. The first one, the top-down or centralist, basically cities are implementers of what the national level says. The second one, which is the bottom-up or localist, where we basically see that that there are like clear competences of what each level does, and the city takes the initiative to be a policy formulator. The third one, which is de-hierarchized, which is basically dynamics of coordination between the different levels. I mean, different levels that enter into coordination on specific issues related to immigrant integration. And finally, the decouple type, or the couple arrangement, where we see that there is a conflictive relationship between cities and other administrative levels because they don't have competences, but still they want to have a say in specific areas related to immigrant integration. So I'm particularly interested on this fourth type of arrangement, this decoupled arrangement. And the reason why I'm so interested in the decoupled arrangement is because when we look at asylum seeker and refugee reception, we may see that actually the position that cities have been occupying in these dynamics, they pretty much fulfill this kind of dynamics. And actually, when we look at the literature on asylum seeker and refugee reception, we see that especially after the 2015 European Refugee Crisis, cities occupy more and more spaces through contestation to and conflict with other administrative levels. And actually, this is something that invites us to think about this new localism, where we see that the power from nation states has moved downwards and outwards and globally. And in this context, cities are innovating in asylum seeker and refugee reception. In fact, there is this very interesting special issue by Oliver et al. From 2020, where precisely they discuss this policy innovation when it comes to asylum seeker and refugee reception. So when I look at the literature on multi-level governance and immigrant integration, and more specifically the one that refers to refugee reception, I uncovered two gaps that I think that are highly relevant if we want to problematize the role of cities in the overall multi-level governance of refugee reception. And these two gaps are related to the leading role that cities may exert in this process. So the first gap is that I find that there is in the literature this assumption of coordination and cooperation on the vertical dimension. So when we look at the literature on immigrant integration, it is quite assumed that actually coordination is the dominant type of arrangement that may occur in this field. However, more and more scholars in the field, they are starting to contest this observation, and they are saying that actually conflict is where we see this innovation emerging, is in these processes of conflict with other administrative levels of occupation of spaces where cities didn't have competences, where we see this innovation to emerge. So I want to precisely link this idea of city leadership to this conflicted view that cities may occupy in the multi-level governance of immigrant integration. And my second gap that I want to focus on is I want to introduce through the idea or through the concept of city leadership the implications that city leadership has on the local governance of refugee reception. If we look at the literature has mainly focused on the vertical dimension. This is the relationships between different levels, but not so much has been discussed about the implications of this vertical dimension on the horizontal one. So I want also to dig into this particular gap. So when we look at the conceptualization of city leadership, we may see that city leadership is a place-based concept as it emerged locally and from the interaction among state and non-state actors. So what we see here is that actually when we discuss city leadership is something that is confined to the local level. It's something that emerged from the city. Of course, it may have implications in global arenas, it may have implications at the international level, but it emerged from the city. So when we see at city leadership, there must be a clear drive for change that follows a transformative vision shared with committed city actors. So when we talk about this transformative vision, it's basically this idea that we need to do a series of steps to reach a destination, and this destination should provide us with a leading role in the area that we are dealing with. When we speak also about leaderships, we are speaking about setting the example locally and before non-city actors. So when we discuss about a city leading in refugee reception, we should be talking about a city that yes, for local actors, is quite cohesive, the actions that are taken, but also at the national and international levels, there is a recognition that this city is precisely leading in this area. However, when we talk about city leadership, we cannot forget about the center local relationships. So, as I said before, when we look at devolve and decentralized systems, the center local interactions can provide the space for cities to expand, occupy, or retrench their policy-making position. So basically, the relationship that the city has with the national level may inform how this city leadership emerge. So when I look at city leadership, I understand it as the outcome of relational processes, deeply ingrained in local dynamics, but informed by the local center political administrative relations and by the calls cities have to provide answers to global challenges. These global challenges might be, of course, we're discussing here refugee reception, but we may also wanted to speak about climate change, about the role of cities, smart cities in economic innovation. So there are different areas where cities precisely can provide answers to these global challenges. Within city leadership, I identify 3 elements that are key to see the emergence of such process. First of all, we see the presence of leaders, which are catalysts for action. They inspire and mobilize around a city vision, which are basically these transformative goals that need of short and long-term actions to achieve it. And finally, the actions to realize such vision. This is basically the actual realization of such visions through these actions. So I expect in my paper city leadership to emerge when there is a political-oriented process and a practice-oriented process. And a political-oriented process, it refers to leaders developing a city vision that inspire and mobilize other actors. It also requires forging coalitions where different actors converge on this city vision, and mayors are essential leaders in this process. And the second one is a practice-oriented process, which basically entails implementing actions to realize such city vision. This process requires the engagement of interdependent but autonomous actors in collaborative relationships where coordination is necessary. Of course, one process cannot exist without the other in order to have city leadership. In order to have city leadership, we need the interrelation of both processes. So going to my cases, as you know, I selected Madrid and Barcelona, and they were, my selection was based on similar cases. Both cities were loudspeakers to refugee reception during and after the 2015 refugee crisis. In the 2015-2019 period, the one that I focus on my paper, they were governed by mayors from the same political platform, which are linked to the political party Podemos. And when it comes to my data collection and analysis, my data collection of these 2 cases was based on 600 newspaper articles, 100 policy documents, 27 interviews with different policymakers in both cities, with leaders from NGOs that were working on refugee reception. All of this I would have been coding all this information through the software NVivo. So before getting into my 2 cases, I would like to give you a little bit of background about Spain and the refugee reception system. When we look at Spain and the refugee reception system, we find a very centralized system where the national level has all the prerogative to precisely guide and steer the process. Here we see that the national level is the one that decides the terms of asylum. I mean, the terms of granting the refugee status to a person, and is also responsible for the reception system. In this process, in this context, the subnational level has very little say. Actually, the law, the 2009 refugee law, doesn't incorporate autonomous communities and cities in their provision. It's very, very marginal, the role that they have. And we find that up to 2015, this was not a politicized issue. I mean, the issue of refugee reception was not part of the public discussion. However, due to the so-called European Refugee Crisis in 2015, we see a politicization of this issue, which is partly brought by cities such as Barcelona and Madrid. And here we find this conflict between the cities and the national level, and Europe precisely asking for a stronger role in this field. And from 2016 onwards, we see that this political conflict derived into an administrative conflict where the subnational level starts asking for more resources, for more competences, for more money, simply because the country, I mean Spain, starts receiving large numbers of refugees, not from Syria or the Middle East, but from Latin America, specifically from Colombia and Venezuela. And actually, the graph over here shows how Barcelona and Madrid are the greatest recipients of the, I mean, when it comes to urban centers, of these flows. So when we look at the findings, and of course these are very preliminary findings, we see I divided them, or I structured them around the political process and the practice-oriented process. And when it comes to Barcelona and the political process leading to this city leadership, we find that the role of the mayor, Ada Colau, was essential as a driving force in the process. Actually, in a famous statement in 2015, she says, either we approach a human drama from the capacity to love that makes us human, or we will end up dehumanized. She also says, although it is a matter of state and European competence, from Barcelona, we will do everything we can to participate in a network of refugee cities. We want cities committed to human rights and life, cities to be proud of. So Colau, she comes into power from this broad platform that were different social movement converge. As you know, she was a pro-housing rights activist. So she comes from here. And when she gets into power, she actually makes as her own this situation of the refugees arriving in Europe, and she pushes for a stronger role of cities in this regard. We see also that local leaders, I mean political leaders, social leaders, they also agree with this position of Colau, and especially they in interviews, some of them were telling me, I mean, we wanted the city to do something. So this idea of to do something was something that was quite relevant in my analysis. So we see how this local government, led by Colau, with these local leaders, were able to articulate a common position on refugee reception. And actually, this common position came to fruition through the Barcelona City of Refuge plan, which is basically this long-lasting vision that position Barcelona as a city of refuge, not only now, but for the decades to come. Overall, we see that in this process, this political process, the local government has a lot of political centrality. This is partly due to the fact that Barcelona is a progressive city with a welcoming tradition. There has traditionally been this tendency to build broad consensus when it comes to immigrant integration. So collaboration and spaces in the center local relationship. Barcelona innovating since the 1990s in immigrant integration, despite not having competences in many areas to do so. When it comes to Madrid, we find that Mayor Manuela Carmena was also a very central figure in this process. She said she defended the position of cities in the reception of refugees, similarly to Barcelona in Spain and abroad. However, her position differed from Colau, because I mean, actually she spoke a lot about responsibility sharing. While we see that Colau was speaking a lot about protagonism, she was speaking about, well, Madrid should, I mean, has responsibilities in this area, but the regional and the national level should also do their work and actually put forward the resources that according to the law are allocated to them. She also positions the municipal government as a partner of the regional and national level. Here we see local leaders, political parties, social actors, again, asking for a bigger role, but in this case of the regional and national level, not the local government, which is a point that is quite interesting. And this is so because we find that somehow they felt that the municipality of Madrid didn't have many competences to do much in this area, therefore they appeal to the regional and national level. And we see, in fact, civil society actors taking the initiative to form, for instance, the Refugee Rights Network, which where municipalities in the community of Madrid were invited to participate, where social actors were invited to participate. Also, we see a relevant role for pro-refugee NGOs which had headquarters in Madrid, and also grassroots movements. Here we find that the local government does not offer a clear city vision. There is a lot of political commitment, a lot of statements, but little long-term strategy. In fact, what we find from the analysis that there is this proposal of an integral plan for the support of refugees, where the mayor and members of her cabinet, they promised 10 million euros for housing and socioeconomic support. But I mean, this does not come with a plan. A long-term plan is more something to tackle the emergency that the city was seeing in those moments. Overall, we find a process where the local government does not have political centrality. This is partly due to competing voices from the regional government, from the national government, both of them which are, of course, in Madrid. Also, the conservative political background in the city, where previous conservative governments did not treat immigrant integration as one of the top priorities. This situation leads to difficulties in building on consensus. Then when we move to practice-oriented processes, we find in Barcelona capacity building in the absence of competence. We see that after 2015, the city builds and expands on existing resources in the area of refugee reception. In fact, the SIRE, which is the one-shop office for migrants, is given more tasks to precisely take to good port the vision that the city had in refugee reception. Also, the city created new actions such as the Nausicaa program for those asylum seekers whose claims were rejected by the national government. Also, we see that the city intervened in situations not considered by the national framework, such as the supervening irregularity that the Nausicaa program was intended to tackle. We also find in this practice-oriented process that the city expanded the base of organizations involved in refugee reception, and the local government tried to coordinate it in this process. So the city didn't work with the refugee and pro-refugee NGOs that the national level was working on. I mean, they actually expanded this base, and they also got involved local NGOs that were experienced in this area. We also find the relevance of city-to-city relationships, actually Barcelona becoming part of of networks where policy officers across Europe were discussing and exchanging good practices in the area of refugee reception. As in the political process, we find that the centrality of the local government in the implementation of actions emerged. So the local government is a reference for local and non-local actors. We find a logic of collaboration between the local government and civil society and policy exchange with other cities. When it comes to the practice-oriented process in Madrid, we find that the actions were basically intended to tackle a situation of emergency, and they were mainly focused on housing asylum seekers in 2016, 2017, and 2018. There were a lot of reports of actually potential asylum seekers sleeping on the streets because the resources, the city resources to offer them accommodations were totally full. Here we don't see this city vision as we see in Barcelona. I mean, these actions are framed in this more emergency situation. Actually, there is this idea of attending the needs of asylum seekers through the existing municipal structures. We don't see like the creation of new structures. And more importantly, we don't see coordination between civil society and the local government. In fact, some interviewees told me that some of the meetings organized by the local government, I mean, some of the invited organizations didn't attend. Some of the members of the regional government did not attend either. So we see here that actually civil society actors coordinate themselves with the national or the regional government. We also see the emergence of parallel networks to the government, and these parallel networks are formed by these civil society organizations. At the same time, we find the emergence of grassroots networks that also work in parallel to the local government. Overall, here we see a local government with no administrative centrality. This is again might be the legacy of conservative governments, where the model that Madrid had was a model of outsourcing social services. I mean, the local government did not have much say in the actual implementation of many of the measures. So we may see this path dependency during this government. Also, we see the administrative concentration of national and regional resources in Madrid, which creates competition again with the local government. So as concluding remarks, we can find that Barcelona and Madrid offer contrasting pictures of city leadership in asylum and refugee reception. We find how they use the spaces of constant contestation or conflict with other administrative levels is different. I mean, Barcelona much more mobilized, while Madrid is more the discourse that precisely address the existing framework in order to attend these issues. Also, another thing that is quite relevant is this differentiation between involvement and leadership. I mean, one thing is to be involved, to say, yes, we want to get involved in refugee reception, but another thing is to lead in this process. And here we can find that a city might be committed to defending an issue, but the lack of direction affects developing leadership. Actually, we find that the emergence of city leadership or no city leadership is very much related to the centrality of the local government in this process. In conclusion, we find that political and practice-oriented processes need of visionary leaders that can build consensus precisely to follow a direction, capacity building and resources, and of course a long-term vision. Of course, the longer the processes are put in motion, the more lasting their effects are. This is, for instance, the case of Madrid in 2019 when Carmena lost the government, and again a conservative government entered into the city administration. As future steps for this paper, I would like to do a more systematic analysis of the data obtained. And with this, I am looking forward to your comments and questions, and thank you for your attention.
Well, thanks a lot for the very interesting presentation, Juan Carlos. If before giving the floor to comments coming from the public, I will have some of mine. I remind to all the people that you can either write comments on the chat or put your hand with the button, and we will give him her the words. Getting back to your presentation and paper, which I had the pleasure to read, I think it's a really valuable and promising piece of research. I think it deals with a crucial and salient issue, the governance of refugee reception and integration, focusing on a compelling aspect, which is the role of the city. Cities, and particularly Barcelona and Madrid, as you well explained, have played a crucial role in the reception and integration of asylum seekers or refugees, especially during 2018 and 2019, having to attend to all people, asylum seekers, that found no place in or no service from a national reception system that was actually collapsed. And I think that the value of your study is not only empirical in showing all these things, and also because the empirical part, as you said, was still to be developed. I think it is also, and I would say especially, a theoretical contribution, as long as it introduces a new concept, that of city leadership, which look like a promising analytical tool to capture the role of local actors in the governance of migrant and refugees integration. Because we have to remember that this particular piece of research by Juan Carlos is focused on the role of integration in the field of asylum and refuge, but cities traditionally in Spain have, along with regional actors, a lot to do, and basically the competences in the integration of migrants. So this is also related to the potential scope of application of your concept. And this is to say that I think that the concept has the potential of broader application beyond the field of study of migration, and to be relevant for other areas of governance. And in this sense, I really look forward to seeing the future development of this work. The concept of city leadership is the core issue of your draft, and has been the core issue of your presentation. So I would focus my comment on this aspect. It's simply a few advice that I hope can be useful for the future of your research and to improve the next version of your article. And then I will give the floor to comments coming from the public. Before moving to the concept, I have one question related to your research question, because in your presentation and in your paper, you have two questions, two research questions, one related more to the condition that allows to the emergence of a city leadership, but also the implication for local actors of being or not a city leaders. So you have two questions, but in your presentation and in your paper, you seems to answer more to the first than to the second one. So I know that it's also a matter of time, and to have time to develop this basing on your funding. So my first question is, can you tell us more about the second research question and the implication of being or not being a city leaders for the local actors? And then I have a few comments regarding the concept of city leadership. The first one is very simple and a bit naive, because it has to do with the label that you use with your concept. Because you use city leadership, but you apply to two cases, which one is successful cases, while the other is a failure cases. So I wonder whether leadership, that has an inherent connotation of success, is the right word to use to describe two different cases, or maybe you can reason about a more neutral term to use. And this is the very first. I have like 3 or 4 comments, and then you decide which one to address, the one that you prefer, of course. Then what maybe I have missed a little bit at the beginning of your paper and your presentation is a clear conceptual definition of what your ideal type, or what is your ideal type of successful city leadership in theoretical terms. That is to say, what is a city leadership according to the literature, or what can we expect to have a city leadership characteristics? Because the way you frame it in the paper, it seems like a little bit based on the findings that you have gathered, and so sometimes it's like a little bit endogenous. So I would like to get it more traced back to the literature you have well addressed and delved into. Because you have done a great work in this regard, but there seems to be margin of improvement. I think you have well identified the theoretical domains of your concept. One has to do with politics, and it's about the political position and recognition of the city in the wide national and global debate. And this is, I think it's important to point out, because it goes beyond the issue of refugees and asylum. And the other has to do with the quality of policies implementation, considering the full policy process, from the vision, that is basically the agenda setting and the goals of the policy, to the practical implementation of the measure, but in this case, referring to a specific policy area, that is the one of asylum and refugee. So you have politics at a broader scale, and then policy and implementation refer to a very concrete area. And you well describe this dimension in terms of process and practice. Sorry, political process and more practical dimension. But I would like to have a few more words about the relationship between these two dimensions. Are both necessary but not sufficient to have a city leader? Can you think of a city leadership due exclusively to its wide political vision and recognition, despite a not successful policy implementation? Or vice versa? Can you think of a city become a leader for the quality of its policy, despite not having a wide political vision and recognized role? And this is simply to say that my advice is to proceed in this refinement of the attributes of your concept and the hierarchical organization. And then I think that if you manage to go further in this, I think you can stress other important contribution of your paper. For instance, the extent to which city leadership in a specific area, which in this case is refugee reception, is related to the fact of doing well policy in this area, or more related to political issue that goes beyond the area of asylum. Because the success of Barcelona, to what extent this positive case, successful case, is related to the position and the recognition that Barcelona managed to have in the broader debate of the nationalistic cleavage, or the position of the city vis-a-vis the national government beyond the area and the issue of asylum and migration. And then I have a couple of comments regarding this case selection. You speak about cities, but sometimes I have the impression you are talking more about majors. So, I mean, you well delve into all the details, but I think that you still have to provide some details regarding the conceptual boundaries and the division between the role of the majors and the rest of the city administration. again, as regards your case selection, you focus on the relevance in terms of demands of the two cases, Barcelona and Madrid, which, as you well said, have represented a crucial contribution after the refugees crisis in Spain. Their political position and discourses in relation to the issue of refugees reception, and their parties belonging. I think that, I mean, it's a well-justified case selection, but I think you might want to consider other dimensions to strengthen the justification of the cases, like the institutional relationship and institutional framework with other actors in the public administration. For instance, the different relationship between Barcelona and Catalonia and Madrid and the region of Madrid, but also their different position in domestic policies, domestic political issue, which goes beyond the issue of asylum. And also, again, regarding the case selection, I mean, I know it's very hard task to do, but I think that to improve the scope of application of your concept, I think you, at some point in time, you might face the need to go beyond Spanish context. And this, of course, complicate a lot the things, because you have to find a city placed in a similar system than the Spanish one, which you have defined as decoupled, which is a very interesting classification on which you ground your concept. But I think that I mean, I was wondering whether adding a new case of a decoupled and ranged but not Spanish can help improve the validity and reliability of your findings. And then a few comments which are more really interested question I have. What about next? Because the Spanish asylum system this year is going through, there is a process of reform going on, and at the national level, I mean, institutions like the government and the ministry responsible have opened discussion with all the stakeholders involved in the Spanish asylum system, and there is the chance, and there seems to be the political willingness to move towards a more decentralized model, which is not clear to what extent and in which terms, but the role of local actors, whether these are regional or municipal, can play a greater role within the national system. So basing on your research, what you expect to have or to happen in the case you have analyzed Barcelona and Madrid? Are you expecting to have Barcelona having a leading role? And what about Madrid with the change of measure compared to the analysis that you have carried out? So these were basically my main comments. I don't know whether there are, yes, I've seen that there are comments in the chat. I don't know if you prefer to answer this one or collect all the comments together.
I think that, yeah, I'm going through very quickly through the questions. So like, okay. Yeah, I think that I prefer to go first to your comments, and
okay.
I will then delve into each one.
Yeah, don't worry. Then I will move to you the question coming from the chat.
Great, thank you, Fran. Thank you so much for all these comments. I mean, really helpful. Actually, they go to the heart of many of the issues that I've been struggling with while writing the paper. Well, I think that that's part of the process to precisely try to find this conceptual clearness. About your first question, Francesco, can you tell us more about the implications? I mean, the second question of my paper. You're right, I don't speak that much about that second question. And I think that in future versions of the paper, I think that I will eliminate this question and maybe use it for another paper. Because I think that, I mean, if I want to consider city leadership as the outcome of the political and the practice-oriented processes, then, I mean, speaking of what happens once you have the city leadership, what happens with the civil society, this is, I think that this is out of the scope of the paper, and this may lead to some confusion on the side of the reader. And I agree, I mean, that this is true. But I mean, thinking about this new paper, I mean, if I think about the implications that the city leadership has for local actors, or not having such leadership, is that basically their voices are more or less taken into account from the city perspective. I mean, from the city perspective, they are not taken into account by, in this case, the local government, which would be like the funnel where all these aspirations or motivations converge. So when it comes to your question about leadership, city leadership, this is an issue that also I've been trying to think. I mean, you know, that in the literature, Sarah Spencer, that she speaks about municipal activism, you know, like these other ideas that may exist around leadership. And the reason why I decided to use the concept of leadership is because, as I said in the presentation, I mean, we talk a lot, especially migration scholars specialize on the local term. We talk a lot about cities leading, but we don't discuss what leading means in this regard. So I wanted to speak about this in these terms. Maybe I may think of more neutral terms. I mean, nothing comes to mind right now, but this is, I mean, this was the rationale behind this part of the paper. When it comes to the ideal type that you were asking about, on city leadership, I mean, all the aspects that I was referring to, I mean, they come from urban scholars, geographers, scholars specialized in the field of regional studies, and they give these three components that I was mentioning. I mean, that having leaders, having a vision, a strategic plan, having something, a direction, which is quite important, and having actions to implement such direction. So from here is where these elements come from. Of course, I try to implement in my analysis or look at them through these lenses that, of course, nurture these two expectations that I was using throughout the paper. But definitely, this is something that, the whole idea of city leadership, this is something that I need to refine, because this is something that I mean, in previous discussions of this paper with other groups of scholars, they have indicated, I mean, a similar concern. When it comes to the issue about the two expectations and the relationship that they have with one another, the thing is that, I mean, this is something that, I mean, yes, you're right. Yes, we may say that the city may lead just by looking at the political process. However, when we say that it's only leading in the political process, then we cannot see what are the real implications of speaking about leadership without having the resources to actually nurture such leadership. If I speak just about leadership without resources, then I think that we would be speaking of a discourse rhetoric, a rhetoric practice gap, which, in my opinion, or how I see it, this city leadership does not exist. I mean, it exists maybe. I mean, it's some sort of political leadership of the local administration, but there is not a shared understanding at the city level of what to do and how to do, or how to address global issues such as refugee reception. When it comes to your comments about the role of the mayor and the city administration, yes, this is something that I need to maybe write in the paper more clearly, at least in the Spanish context. What are the competencies that the mayor has? What it means to be the mayor? What is the difference with the local council? I think that this is something that is missing in the paper, this part of the contextualization. And I think that is quite interesting what you mentioned about, maybe using these cases as, comparison to other countries. Like 1 year ago, I was doing an academic stay in the Netherlands, and actually I came across with this issue of refugee reception. I was working in Rotterdam, and actually you find that the position of Amsterdam is very different from the position of Rotterdam. And actually Rotterdam has a more conservative government. Amsterdam is more progressive, and these ideological leanings, of course, they have an impact on the position of both cities in this issue. And actually we see Amsterdam taking a more leading role. Actually, Amsterdam is part of the Solidarity City Network that is sponsored by Eurocities. Actually, we see the mayor that is quite committed to this issue. In Rotterdam, the mayor didn't want to speak about refugee reception. They didn't want to speak about this issue simply because, the mayor was worried that the far right that was present in the local council could make electoral gains from this kind of more welcoming public stance. And what about next? Yes, I'm aware of what you were describing. All the whole discussion. Actually, my interviews, 80% of my interviews, this issue came to the picture. There is a little bit of concern of what is going to happen, how this is going to be materialized. About the role of autonomous communities. I think that it's quite hard because they are still in a in my opinion, a quite preliminary phase where they are not very clear about what is the role that they may do. Some of them, some actors at the local level, they were saying, well, maybe we will get some competences similar to the ones of immigrant integration, that we don't have exactly like the competences on this, but it's understood that the social aspects of refugee receptions will fall under the competences of cities and autonomous communities. Then we will have some room of maneuver to maneuver around these issues. But still, it's quite embryonic, the whole discussion. And if I may answer the questions from the audience.
Yeah, sure. I see Gulse her hands up. So if she wants to pose a question directly. Well, first of all, thanks for the very thoughtful answer and very interesting. I was especially interested in your stay and possible comparison with other cities, and you were speaking about Rotterdam, and I think that this gets back to what I was suggesting you to try to improve the scope of your concept beyond the Spanish case, because in this sense you may end up having a broader concept of city leadership that is not strictly related to one of the cases of the coupled system, that is the Spanish one, but maybe you can find and analyze conditions of a city leadership that are broader and deeper and goes beyond the Spanish case, comparing with other cities. While we wait for Gulse and their question, she cannot unmute, unfortunately. So if you want to write your question in the chat, I will forward it to Juan Carlos. In the meantime, I have a question coming from Eva Fortes, who is curious about the role of regional governments and says, you mentioned that in Madrid, civil society organizations work more closely with regional and national governments rather than local city level. Do you think that may play a role in whether the local government took leadership? In other words, was there a difference in the potential receptivity of regional government to civil society requests between Barcelona and Madrid regions that may drive the difference in the local level leadership? Or do you think it was the local lack of leadership that leads civil society organization to work with regional, national versus local government?
Yes, Eva, thank you very much for your question. And I think that, I mean, at least in the case of Madrid, is more the latter than the former. I think that the city, the municipality was a little bit too cautious to try to exert a stronger role in practice when it comes to refugee reception. So, because I mean, if we look at Barcelona, Madrid, I mean, the competences that both cities have, they are the same. I mean, they don't have competences in refugee reception. However, we see that in one city, I mean, we see a more proactive role, and in another city, we don't see this more proactive role. And I think that this is something that we see, that I mean, in Madrid at least, this leadership from the municipality, at least from a practice-oriented perspective, didn't emerge, and which is a situation that, of course, left a vacuum that was occupied by this relationship with the regional and the national level, which actually the regional national level, the regional level in many cases were saying, well, we are doing more than actually we were supposed to do, because these are not our competences. However, we may give some resources to this area, something that is more short term. When it comes to civil society organizations, the Spanish system, it has, I mean, the national level has 21 civil society organizations where the Spanish government outsourced some of the services provided to, I mean, for refugee reception. So these CSOs which had headquarters in Madrid, where actually they said, well, we don't need the local government. On top of that, the local government is not precisely taking a more decisive role in this area. Therefore, our interlocutor is the national level or the regional level. So this would be my answer.
I don't know whether Eva wants to add something, because I've seen she has pressed their hands.
Hello.
Yeah. Hi.
Okay. Thank you. Yes, I hear what you're saying, but I was writing it and now it disappeared from my chat. Okay. Well, yes, but my question is about directionality, because also in your response, I guess it's a two-part thing. One is directionality, because in your response you mentioned that the lack of leadership in Madrid created a vacuum that was then filled by the regional government. But I'm wondering whether, could you say that the lack of leadership in Catalonia created a vacuum that was filled by Barcelona? I mean, I'm sure you're right and your interpretation is right, but I want to see it addressed a little bit as to why it's this way and not the other way. And my other question was whether the relationship between the city and its region can influence. So the relationship between Barcelona as a city and the Catalan region versus the relationship between Madrid city and its region, and whether that can have a relationship to whether you end up in this decoupled versus kind of a one of the other sets. So, but yeah, and thank you again. I find this really interesting. A very good presentation. Thank you.
Thank you, Eva. Brad, should I answer right away, or?
Yes, please, go on.
Okay, great. So, Eva, thank you again for clarifying your question. So, I mean, when we look at the regional level on both, I mean, that corresponds to both cities, we see something that, I mean, is quite interesting, because when it comes to Catalonia, we find that, yes, we find that in maybe the public debate, the Catalan government was very much pro-refugee welcome, and we would assume that this would mean that the Catalan government would become a strong ally, especially in the implementation of measures by the city of Barcelona. However, when I speak with several people who work in this area in the city of Barcelona, in the municipality, but also civil society organizations, they say that unfortunately this seems to be a more political message rather than something that is filled with resources. Actually, some of them, they say, well, actually we got 1 million euros from the Catalan government, and this was pretty much it, is what this person, particular person, told me. So we see that in this context, where yes, we have a quite facilitating environment for Barcelona to develop this role, we find that at least the Catalan government in practice does not offer much resources. So in these parties where we see such emergence. When it comes to Madrid, I mean, maybe in my previous answer, maybe I gave the impression that the community of Madrid did a lot about this, but actually it was more in those years that there were several statements. They opened actually a center for refugee reception. However, despite of these good intentions, we don't see, again, like a structured funding throughout the years, especially in the implementation. And I must say that right now, when I was speaking with my interviewees in Madrid, especially after 2019, they said basically that the regional government had disappeared from the picture, is what they said. I mean, it was not a relevant actor anymore. And what we see is that actually these civil society organizations working with refugees, I mean, they tend to establish a more direct relationship with the national level, and maybe the regional level becomes like a mediator to some extent, is what I got from the first interviews. I don't know if that answered your question.
Yes, that makes a lot of sense. Thank you. Thank you again.
Thank you, Eva.
Thanks a lot for the interesting question, Eva. I think that there are two others which points to similar aspects of your study, which has to do with, I think, the role of city, and when it ends the role of city and it begins the role of other actors, that it's a complex picture you have to frame in your paper. And other two questions point to this dimension. The first one is by Rebecca, who asked whether you think there is a limitation to city leadership regarding how much they can possibly facilitate refugee integration. That is to say, citing your question, do you think there is inevitably a gap for NGO and civil society to fill in this area? And then the question by Gulse is that if you have considered to use the city branding as a component of city leadership. So both of questions, I think that points to your concept and might help you to develop it.
Yes, definitely. Thank you, Rebecca, and thank you, Gulse, for your questions. Rebecca, when you ask, there is inevitably a gap for NGOs and CSO to fill in this area. Yes, of course. I mean, there is, of course, I mean, I never argue that the city leadership means that the local government does everything. Simply that the local government within this city leadership, when it emerges, acts as a coordinating node. I mean, it has it's able to put together this city vision with different local actors, and everyone is walking on in the same direction to actually realize such vision. So in this process, of course, the complementarity between the local government and the civil society is necessary. However, what I was very interested in was to look about the, in this whole process, this centrality of the local government in precisely steering this process. The question about that Gulce asked about city branding. Yes, I'm very much fan of branding. I know what with precisely Peter Scholten and Guarda Belabas and other people at the Erasmus University of Rotterdam. They have worked extensively on this issue. I don't know. I think that using city branding, at least in my case, I think that it would overcomplicate the message that I want to convey, because city branding might be more related to maybe the added value that migration might entail for a city, if we think in economic terms, in, I don't know, other areas beyond this more humanitarian approach that I want to convey through all my papers. So yeah, I thank you for the suggestion, but yeah, I don't know. I don't think that at least in my case it would be applicable. However, I'm happy to discuss with you anytime if you find this as a good option. And I see that there was a comment by Claire, but I think that she left, and she was mentioning about my representation of the mayors as part of Podemos. And yeah, for the sake of the presentation, I didn't delve too much into and also in the paper I haven't developed much this part actually where these mayors come from, and I completely agree that I need to refine this aspect in the paper in a way that truly reflects what Claire mentions. Actually, there are several articles written on the emergence of the Ayuntamiento del Cambio, and actually how it's very much linked to local social movements. So yeah.
I don't know whether Rebecca and Eva or Gulce, if she managed to solve her micro problem, wants to reply to Juan Carlos' answers.
Thank you, Rebecca.
Okay, thank you. So I see there is no, apart from greetings and congratulations and share of interest. I don't know, Juan Carlos, if you want to tell us more about what is the project, how is going on the project, and what you expect to have in the coming future out of this research.
Thank you, Fra, for the question. Well, the whole idea with the project is precisely to understand what are the drivers behind cities getting more involved, even without having the competencies to do so in this arena. And after, of course, understanding such process, it would be interesting to look at, which areas cities might have, even in the absence of these competencies, may have a greater role. Actually, through my fieldwork, my interviewees, they were very generous about providing how they envision the role that their cities should have in this area. So this is something that definitely I would like to take into consideration as future steps for this project.
Yeah, thanks a lot. I think it's a very interesting areas of research. European Commission finally have started to acknowledge the relevant role of local actors, and I refer both to region and cities, but also cities, civil societies in driving and ensuring migrant and refugees integration. And I think that your paper will provide a great contribution in this field, which on the other hand speaks to relevant branch of the literature, which is the one of multi-level governance that you have illustrated. And I think that, again, it is very promising in the sense of comparing with other cases, because you have now compared two cities which has no formal competencies recognized, but has somehow, one better the other, managed to develop parallel system to the national one. It would be very interesting to see compare this kind of cases with maybe cases of cities which have competencies, but some that maybe have done something, other that has not, and so broaden the scope of your case comparison. Yes. And I don't know if there is no other question coming from the public. I don't know whether you want to add something, Juan Carlos.
No, I just to thank you, Francesco, for being a wonderful discussant, for so many encouraging questions, and to all the audience for all your questions and comments. This is really helpful, and I'm very happy to see that. These questions, that means that the topic is interesting to everyone, and I'm very glad to read them.
Well, thanks to you. Christine left the last comments on the chat that if you want to add a global level governance, she will be happy to discuss with you in further details. Thanks again for your interesting presentation and very promising paper and research. I really look forward to reading more of it. And thanks a lot to all the people who have followed the session, and to the IBEI for organizing, and Martin in particular, and Elena, who have allowed us to come up with this seminar. And I wish everybody a nice afternoon and evening, and see you soon.
Thank you very much, Francesco. Thank you all.